Welcome back, everyone. I am Cas Piancey. I'm joined as usual by my partner in crime, Mr. Bennett Tomlin. How are you today? Yeah.
How are you?
Slogging along. We're trying out a new thing. We're going to try to post one of these shorter videos every week. We literally have ourselves on a timer right now. So we're going to try to keep this as short and succinct as possible so that we can keep everybody updated. With that out of the way, I think it's worth starting this discussion today. Actually, let's start with the least important one first. Bennett and I both watched a press conference by David Sachs, who is the crypto czar of the Trump administration, a South African who is basically like a mini Elon Musk, less successful, less interesting Elon Musk.
He's the one who wrote the rape apologia book with Peter Thiel.
As evil as Elon Musk, but like just less successful and less interesting. Anyway, he did a press conference and it was terribly stupid. But yeah, go ahead, Bennett, get into that.
Sure. So David Sachs held a press conference along with G.T. Thompson, French Hill, Tim Scott, and Bozeman to talk about all the important cryptocurrency things they're about to do, which is two bills, a stablecoin bill and a market structure bill. The stablecoin bill is coming from Senator Hagerty, and the House intends to introduce one similar. This puts some limits on what reserves stablecoins would be able to hold, tries to set the Fed and the OCC up as the two primary stablecoin regulators, but because this is important to Wyoming, included a carve-out for state regulator to get like waived out of federal oversight if there's like a state regulator overseeing you. And so that's what like any problematic stablecoin will probably end up doing, is trying to get waived out of the federal regulation into a state regulator, probably in Wyoming. And so that's the stablecoin bill that they intend to advance.
I want to just quickly also mention that during this press conference, the way that they were just talking about dollar hegemony and the idea of like we need more people to have access to dollars because that will strengthen the dollar, is like completely missing a really important part of the strength of the dollar, which is that the government is able to easily stop many nations and individuals from being able to easily access the US dollar. And if you make it easier and easier to access the US dollar, I see why that helps with the velocity of money, but it doesn't necessarily help strengthen the money.
Well, and if we're talking about access to money, like you probably don't cut off all federal grants, federal payments to a variety of different places and try to crash the entire global economy at the same time, because a lot of people get their primary access to money from their jobs. Before we have to worry about whether or not they can put those dollars on whatever blockchains they want, they need the initial dollars. And that's the real problem for most people, right? Democratization of finance is a lie meant to sell you scams, because most people who don't have access to financial services, it's because they lack money.
Yeah.
Exempting, there are people who get an unfair stick, but like that's the big part of it. The other bill is a market structure bill. It sounds like it's going to be FIT 21 2.0, which primarily punts a lot of cryptocurrency regulation to the CFTC, which, as we recently talked about with Sean Tuffy, the CFTC doesn't have the budget, the manpower, or like the wherewithal to do that kind of regulating. And like the really problematic part of FIT 21 is it uses like a hilariously broad definition of decentralized, which as long as like there's not one issuer or one person with 20% of the token supply, it like counts as decentralized and goes into like the CFTC's little exemption playbook. I'm broad strokes for these bills. There's little subtle details you can get into if you hate yourself. But like broadly, the idea is to punt crypto to the CFTC, gut the regulatory agencies, make sure nothing gets regulated. And Tim Scott says he can get these bills passed out of the Senate in 100 days. And Kirsten Gillibrand is a feckless coward who has agreed to collaborate with fascists to advance crypto regulation for some reason.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So that goes over that. Also, I think, we'll link to the Sean Tuffy episode because there's a lot of reasons that the CFTC It's not like it's an incompetent agency. It just doesn't have the ability to do this.
Oh, unless we're expanding the CFTC's budget. Are we giving the CFTC 10 times more budget in the next reconciliation? I don't fucking think so.
Maybe we should merge it with the SEC, but I guess that's a different discussion. But that does bring up the SEC, which is another topic that we want to talk about, because it seems like the SEC will no longer be doing any investigating anymore, right?
Yeah, so the change was specifically reported by Reuters, and it says that like SEC lower level staff can no longer start investigations without first getting approval of the politically appointed commissioners. So nothing's going to be investigated. It's being described generously in the press as a barrier to investigations, but it fundamentally means that basically nothing is going to get investigated unless you can get these highly politicized actors to agree to investigate it. We're past the point of like things not being enforced or them not bringing actions. There's not even anyone checking. There's not even going to be anyone looking. They're not going to be able to get approval. And the bigger fallout from this is it's going to drive so many of the lower level staff, the competent people who could eventually build like some kind of regulator, out of the SEC in a way that even when you build the political will around wanting to regulate, it will take a huge infusion of funding and a long amount of time to rebuild the regulatory state they're gutting.
Yep. It's so hard to rebuild these agencies once you gut them to bare bones. It's like a metaphor where it's like, I think generally what you do is if you buy a home that's in a state of complete disrepair, you're often better off just like knocking it down and rebuilding a new one because it's cheaper. The way they're gutting these agencies, it's like whatever is going to remain by the time someone else comes into power is going to be hard to imagine that they can even, it'll take generations to rebuild this stuff.
There's a finite number of people, lawyers and experts, who are capable and willing of working for this type of group, and you've just made that group even smaller. You know?
Yeah.
We should also then, since we're on this general thing, we should talk about how our favorite free speech advocates have now made it a crime to report on Elon Musk's DOGE collaborators.
So 2 things here. First of all, we're going to link to the Wired reporting. You can find that in the details of the episode below, or if you're listening on a podcast, you can find it in the episode notes. The reporting is fantastic. I urge you to become a member of Wired. Pay them. They're doing amazing work covering the coup. And what they did was they went ahead and they named these individuals: Akash Baba, Edward Korestein, Luke Fariator, Gautier Cole Killian, Gavin Kleiger, and Ethan Chautran. The reason we're naming them is specifically because of our last episode with Ed Zitron, where he said a really important part of this is naming names. So these individuals are interns. They're no ones. They're interns at the DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, which is
not a department.
Is not a real governmental department. They're interns there, and they basically went in office space style and started asking people what their duties were, changing code, doing all kinds of things at the Office of, Office of Personal Management, whatever it is.
Yeah, so they took over, they like went into Office of Personnel Management, they went into Office of Budget Management, they have connected unauthorized devices into like the Treasury's secure payment systems, and it was initially reported that was read access. They apparently have both read and write access to these payments, despite there being court injunctions against like the federal funding freezes and things like that. There are still people reporting that like certain agencies have yet to receive their grants and things like that. There's still gaps which seem to suggest that the Trump administration is not perhaps completely adhering to the court injunctions so far, which is illegal. It's a crime.
We're going to keep saying it. We're going to keep saying it. Thanks. And Chuck Schumer really nailing it home for these guys, huh? A bill to make sure that what was already illegal is acknowledged as...
Chuck Schumer is worried the coup may make your chicken wings expensive. And he's right. It will. But anyways.
There's a coup, Chuck. There's a coup. Anyway, yeah. Great points.
Ed Martin, the Attorney General for DC, has threatened on X to prosecute people revealing these names and these details and things, which, seems like an illegal use of state power to silence journalists, critics, and the press in a complete and utter violation of the First Amendment.
And I want to keep saying that Elon Musk is quote tweeting all these people and saying that's illegal. But there's no law he's referenced. Like, this is not illegal. It is not illegal to name names of people destroying the government. There's
which makes it especially terrifying that the Attorney General for DC is like, yes, President Musk, I agree with you that this is a crime we need to prosecute. Like, even I need everyone in the audience to understand, even if you win your federal case and it gets thrown out, by the time it gets thrown out or whatever, there is a good chance you are like bankrupt, unemployed, and your life has been ruined because like the case has been brought against you and the effect that has. And that is their goal, is to chill and silence and cut people off, make people afraid to say Akash Baba or Edward Korstein or any of these people because it means that they risk ruining their entire life.
Yeah, which is silly. It's silly, this idea that they would go, it's not silly in that I don't think they'll do it. That's not what I'm saying. It's very possible they do this stuff, which again points to our last episode with Ed, where it's like, I specifically said they were going to sue people about this and they were going to, like, I didn't say arrest because I thought that would go too far. But if they do, am I surprised? No. But does that mean we all need to shut our mouths? Well, no, then they win. So, our job as content creators and members of the press, we need to push back as hard as we possibly can against this stuff. So yeah, proudly name names if you have the opportunity to.
And we should also mention, as part of his efforts to dismantle the federal government and illegally stop funds that Congress has already appropriated, Elon Musk has put in his sights the OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which receives a large portion of its budget from federal initiatives, often through agencies like USAID and things like that are directing it to OCCRP because they report on things. One of the, I think it was a Groyper, but it might have been some other kind of alt-right crazy person on X that Musk was retweeting, was like, why did the government fund the OCCRP when they went after Rudy Giuliani? And Elon Musk quote tweeted it and was like, we're going to cut this off. And obviously, there's obvious reasons Elon Musk doesn't want the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project to exist. It's in the name why he doesn't want it to exist.
Exactly. And, Bennett and I were posting about this over on Blue Sky. And I just want to point out that Oliver Rivers actually quote tweeted Bennett, who had said something about how the OCCRP was getting, they're trying to defund it. And Oliver Rivers, who's the COO of the OCCRP, said, we're not going anywhere. So that's what I love to see, is these journalists basically putting their foots down and saying, nope, this is bullshit. It doesn't matter if they defund us. We are going to be a successful organization regardless. So I'm really proud of them. And if you can afford to support OCCRP, Wired, Rolling Stone, there's so many people doing really good work out there. Please, if you have an opportunity, I'm begging you. It's now or never. You might not have a Wired or a Rolling Stone in a year or two based on this administration. So pay for it now, because the work they're doing is super duper duper important.
Yeah. And I think that's basically where we're at. They have illegally seized the levers of power in the government. They are attempting to destroy the ability to regulate, prosecute, investigate. They are setting themselves up for complete and utter corruption, graft, and just dismantling of the entire infrastructure. And I guess we all have to talk about it.
Yep. And this is why we hedge with Cascoin, guys. This is why we hedge.